Howdy y'all, I am Ice Gold, and today we're going to be doing the third video where I rank all of the schools in PvP after having made a tier list with these categorizations with all of the matchups that can happen in the game, excluding mirrors of course. So I've done this a couple times already. If you don't know what's going on, I will be organizing all of these, or not all of these, I'll be organizing each matchup that you can see into these categories, and over here is the one from August. This is basically the school that's on top is the school that is supposed to win. So that's why you can see I haven't used all of these images. It's just whatever's on top is going to be what wins. And as you can see here, I've got these 5 categorizations. We've got tilt margins, which means the school on top barely wins. It's actually up here. It's like the top school is barely favored to win. A lean margin is the matchup leans slightly in favor of the top school, where the bottom school can absolutely still win. For likely margins, the top school likely wins, but the bottom school still can win if they, play better, or like a deck fail happens, that type of deal. And safe matchups are top school wins safely, barring skill gaps and major deck fails. That one should be pretty obvious, given that it's called safe. And then one-sided is there is no reality for the bottom school to win, barring a colossal skill gap. So yeah, I don't use this tier too much, but we could see it change in the coming days with a Mana Burn and Supernova ban on the horizon. But for the time being, it's I'm going to be uploading this October 3rd, so I will be ranking the schools accordingly with how they are all performing at the moment, and I will absolutely make a follow-up once that burn ban happens and enough time has passed to where things really shake out. So stay tuned for that. I usually do these every like 6 to 8 weeks, but once that happens, I will probably make one after maybe a week or 2, and that could be coming sooner rather than later. So we'll have to see where that goes, but this is the list that I had from August. We have a lot of safe matchups, and then a lot of likely matchups, and then the tilt and lean matchups. These are what I call the swing matchups, and these are matchups where it's like it could reasonably go either way, but you still see like one school favored over another. It's like these are the ones that really come down to skill, and it's kind of a shame that we've seen a colossal reduction in how many of these there are. There used to be 9 up here, and now there's 3, but who knows? I'm making this tier list again. We might see more than 3 swing matchups, but we'll figure things out. I do already see at least one that is going to not be a swing matchup though, so let's see what goes on here. So, kicking off with balance versus death. On the last one, I put this in the safe category towards the back. So I think I might have said this might have been favoring the balance wizard by 35 more games out of 100. So you're gonna hear me say, oh, balance wins by 35, or this is like a death plus 20 matchup, and that's kind of just what I mean by that. It's like that's how many more games out of 100 that the top school wins against the bottom school. So with that being said, this will still go in the safe tier, and I think there has actually been a widening in the margin. I don't think it's widened by too much, but given how the matchup works, it's like Gearhead Destroyer just nuts on poison, and there's just a lot of other things that death does. It's like now the drains are gone. This was already a swing matchup back when drains were just brutally insane. So yeah, this is like a tilt or lean death back when that was a thing, just to show y'all how mental balance has been. But now with drains gone and balance still having all other tools and death being reduced to nothing, this is a safe matchup, and we've seen a little bit of an expansion in the margin in favor of the balance. I'm going to call this balance plus 40, which is up 5 from the list back in August. Next up, balance versus fire. Now this is one that I put in the likely category back in August, and I said maybe balance wins maybe 15 more games against the fire. but I think that's expanded a little more. I don't think it quite lands in the safe category, but I am going to put this back in the likely category, and I'm going to say that there's been a little bit of an expansion in favor of the balance here. I would say maybe balance plus 25 as opposed to the 15 that I put it in before, because just with how Mana Burn works and with how Fire is kind of fallen, and you're going to see that as we go along, but I do definitely think that this has expanded, but Fire is one of those schools that's a little too volatile for me to really put this in the safe category. It was definitely closer before, but I mean, you know, if the balance just sticks to their guns, you know, doesn't really shield a whole lot, goes all in on like weaknesses and lore masters, and obviously now it's top path scales of destiny. Now that that's a thing, it's like that is going to be an expansion for the balance. It's like now that balance has an easier time out damaging a fire, it's going to be much harder for the fire to win, and I do think that this is going to end up being a likely matchup in favor of the balance. Next up, balance versus ice, without a question. We're going to be putting that into the one-sided tier, because I mean, just think about it. It's like, as long as Mana Burn and Supernova are still in the game, as well as Gearhead, this is definitely just going to be in the one-sided tier, just because everything that balance does and stands for just neuters ice in the worst possible way. There is no reality in which an ice wizard is going to beat a balance wizard if the balance wizard isn't like completely throwing. So I have seen it happen, and most of it is because balances just don't really know how to play the matchup. But a good balance will always beat a good ice. That's why it's in the one-sided category. This is like balance plus 80 to 90, something in there. There has been a little bit of reduction in the margin, but it's kind of like, you know, Chris Paul hits a huge three to cut the lead down to 42, you know what I'm saying? So balance, it's still going to absolutely thrash ice until that burn and pop ban comes around. But when it does, I do think that we're going to see this become a swing matchup. As crazy as that's gonna sound, this is gonna descend like 4 or 5 tiers once that happens. So I'm real excited for that as an ice main personally. But wow, it's like this. I think it's like just burn, pop, and scales. It's like scales at least being gone is a little helpful, so you can at least gall them and still be able to take a hit trade. But ultimately, balance can sit under brace much better than ice can. It's like, even though Supernova TCs are gone, it's like a balance can still get 1,000 free damage on an ice if we brace. So do the math on that one. It's like ice is not beating balance, and it's like an average balance can beat a good ice. That's where we're at. And it's like I've seen balances pass multiple times in a row because they can. It's like ice already does no damage because balance has insane resist, and ice has, you know, doggy style pierce and damage. But that's another big thing that makes the matchup one-sided. But enough on that. It's like, y'all already know there's just so much of what balance does and what balance just is that just makes it that way. So one-sided for the balance. Balance versus life. On this one, I had this at probably balance plus 40, I think is where I put it. And I do think that there's been a little bit of reversion. I think the margin has decreased here, actually, and I'm going to be putting it in safe tier still, but it's going to be, I do think that it's going to be balance plus 30 as opposed to the 40 that it was before. Life is just, I mean, if you play life correctly, you can stand a chance. It's like there's things that life wizards can do that can really help in this matchup. But again, with brace, it's like if a balance just sits under brace for 20 rounds, there's not really much you can do as a life wizard. So yeah, and it's like life is the chip school alongside ice. So a chip strategy versus balance, it's just not going to work out as well. And it's like any school that has to chip away at a balance's health is just not going to do great. That's why you see Death here. Death can do some big damage with things like Grim Reader, or if you have Top Path Monster Mash, but it's like the chip schools just don't really do great. And the only reason why this isn't further on to the right, and the reason why the margin here isn't insane, is because life's healing. It's like if you goat monk too much, then they'll gearhead, and that's why this is in the safe category. But if you use your heals wisely, then this is, you can win occasionally. So balance plus 30. That's what we're going to leave it at. Next up is balance versus myth, and I think that I did put this in the likely category. I think I said this might have been like myth plus 12 or something, but I think this is like the one matchup where balance isn't quite favored, but even still, there's been a little bit of reduction in the margin. I think we're going to officially declare this our first swing matchup of the video. I do think that myth beats balance maybe 54 to 46, so a margin of 8 games, which is a slight reduction, and it does bring it down into the lean category. But yeah, I mean, it's like, and I should mention, tilt is like 1 to 2 more games out of 100, lean is up to 10, likely is 30, safe is, there's really no boundary on this, but one-sided is like the 80 to 90 margin, so that's just where we're at on that. So, lean myth matchup. Myth, it's just their ability to ignore any form of debuff is really, really helpful, but balance has, like there's been some reduction in the matchup because of just the amount of tools balance still has. It's like, you know, burn is very, very good for keeping a myth's pips down, and that can do some good damage, but brace is also really helpful. But that's kind of just how this is with myth versus balance. So yeah, myth still should win, but a balance definitely has a better chance than they did a couple months ago. Next up, we have balance versus storm, and storm has been kind of insane lately. I'm gonna be real. This I put here, I think maybe a margin of balance plus 40 or 45. But this, it's like in the time since, I genuinely think that with how, you know, Dark Surgeon and Power work, we're seeing our second swing matchup. It's like balance is favored in this one, and a balance should win, but the pressure that a storm can put up, it's like I was saying earlier, balance is really, really good against chip strategies, but storm is anything but that. It's like if a storm has a bubble up and a catch blade, it's like even a Catalan is doing like 4,000 to your head, even as a balance. And brace is really, really helpful, and storm kind of does fold the shields, but if storm is running, you know, fire elf, then that can really be helpful. And I think that's what brings this down to a lean margin. It's like storm and balance are the top 2 schools right now in my opinion, but balance is favored just by a little bit. I'm gonna call this balance plus 5. I think it's closer than the myth matchup, but it's like a balance. This is one of those matchups where you do have to be careful as a balance. So that, it's like Mana Burn doesn't always work, and it's like storm can do so much damage with so few pips, and that's what has caused a reduction of about 40 points in the margin here. So what can I say? Balance versus storm, lean balance. We got another swing matchup. Speaking of swing matchups, here's one that is not a swing matchup in the slightest. The last time I did this tier list, this was after the Drain nerf, about 2 weeks after the Drain nerf, and it was already kind of a toss-up with Myth and Death. Before the Drain nerf, it's like Myth and Balance were the only 2 schools that could really get Death a run for its money. But now I don't see a reality in which a Death can beat a Myth. Reliably, at least. So I think the last time I did this, I said this was like myth plus 50, and I think I'm gonna stand by that. I haven't really seen anything in terms of like expansion or reduction in terms of the margin with this matchup. So I think Myth versus Death, it's going to easily be safe, and it's going to be our safest matchup thus far outside of the one-sided category. So Myth versus Death, I'm going to give that safe Myth plus 50 matchup there. Next is Death versus Fire, and this is one that I've played a little bit, especially recently as I prepared for tomorrow's video, but this is one that I put kind of far back over here. I think I said this was maybe Death plus 45 to 50, and it was one of Death's best matchups, but this, I've seen some reversion, and I think that this might be the matchup. It is still safe Death, I feel like, but it's gonna be the matchup that is gonna probably permanently be at the closest to the border of the likely and safe margins. I think that because it's like fire can still do a lot of damage real quick, especially with things like Scion and obviously Bury Rain of Fire. But I mean, Death does counter Bury Rain of Fire. It's like if you keep a Skeletal Pirate up against a fire, you should be just fine. But you do still need to be careful. It's like, this is probably Reg Fire's, this is one of Reg Fire's better matchups, which is kind of crazy to say because it's safe Death. But I think as long as you're able to keep a 60 weakness on a fire, you should be fine, because those chromatic 60s are kind of all that's keeping Death afloat these days. It's like, I would definitely say Death versus Fire is safe for the Death, but it's like, this is one where you have to be careful. It's like, if you play your cards right, you'll win without a doubt, but if you don't, like, the fire can very easily kill you. And I would put this in the likely or lean margin if I thought that was hard to do at all, but just pack 8 3-folds and, 6 vampires, some spellman wraiths, and you should be just fine. I'm gonna keep it a bug. So Death versus Fire, it's gonna be in the safe category, but it's right up there on the border. So there's been a reduction of about maybe 20 points here. Next up, Fire versus Life, and in the last one I put this at, I think, maybe Life plus 20 to 25. I think it was 25, but now I think it's like, because I've played a bunch of Fire games in preparation for tomorrow's video, and I think that we have seen quite the expansion in the margin here, because it's like Fire. It's like Reg Fire, Life counters that easily. It's like you could just Earthwalker off a Krampus and be fine. Or, I've seen Life Wizards carrying Spinosaur and their King Artorias, which really just breaks the strategy that I run, which is Bury Rain of Fire. It's like, Life is the one school where it's like, as a fire you can go for Bury Rain, but the Life can counter it. It's like, it is 5 overtimes that you get with just one berry, but if a Life sends a Spinosaur at you, they are gaining most of their pips back and you are losing most of your health. That is just how things are, and for that reason I'm going to put this in the safe category for the Life. There's been an expansion, this moved from likely to safe, and I think that I'm going to give this to the Life Wizard by about 40 more games out of 100 compared to the Fire. It's like, maybe a Fire can still win if the Life doesn't counter, but the Life really does have the best counters to everything that a Fire can do. And it's like King Artorias especially. It's like Spinosaur, you can use that if you want to go for extra damage on your opponent, and King Art is if you want to heal yourself. So it's like, Life just has the best counters now for damage over time. So definitely going to be moving that into the safe category. Next up is Fire versus Myth, and this was our closest matchup in the last one, and I gave it a tilt margin in favor of the Myth, and I think I'm going to do that again. This is a very close matchup, and it probably still is the closest in the game, and I'm like, Myth versus Fire. It's like, Fire can go for something like Bury Rain, of course, and Myth is not as great at countering that. Of course, they still can if they run Triton and whatnot, but Myth versus Fire, it's like the main thing that keeps this matchup close at all, really, much less, what's the saying? Let alone, rather, let alone keeping this matchup in the myths column. But it's like the main thing that's keeping this matchup close is the fact that myth has burst hits at 10 and 11 pips, with the 11 pip myth gen being the most infamous offender here, and fire does not. Fire does not have a 9 pip, 10 pip, or 11 pip hit allowed in PvP that just does burst damage, and that is where myth pulls ahead. It's like, fundamentally, if myth gen and maybe celestial calendar didn't exist, we would probably see fire win like this, probably in the likely category. But since fire does not have that kind of tech, this is just gonna... It's like a myth can just blade 3 times, maybe get bubble, press the reliquary card, send a base gen, and you do all their health. It's like... It's like poor man's PvE, but it works. It's like just stack a bunch of buffs, and it's like you don't even need that many buffs. So it's like you just stack maybe 4 or 5 buffs, and then you get a gen that puts you up by enough, and from there you can just win the match. Because it's like I said again, it's like myth can ignore all forms of damage mitigation outside of, like brace and healing, but fire doesn't do either of those things, and myth can mitigate fire's damage with weakness. So it's just sort of, yeah, it's like this is, it's like I talk a lot about how favorable this is for the myth, but it is still going to be in the tilt category because fire can catch up. And if a fire is able to get like an Ifrit off, or like a Scion, like Berry Rain is very effective against myth. So it's like if a fire goes for that, then the fire can win quite easily, I might add. But it's like this is one of those games that could be over in less than 10 rounds. So it's just kind of up to, does the myth pull buffs better? Does the fire pull their combos better? And that's sort of what it comes down to. This is probably the most skill-based matchup out of all of them, and requires the most good deck RNG out of all of the matchups. So, gonna give this Tilt Myth victory. I would have expanded on this if Berry Rain didn't come into play, but it did. So that's what is keeping it very close. And if I could give this a toss-up rating, I would, but just the way the emojis that Flora made. Yeah, it's like, and I should mention these icons were made by a deck of Flora on Tumblr. So if you were looking for these, go check that out. So next up, Fire versus Storm. Oh boy, everybody's favorite. And this fundamentally probably could go down here, but it is still a volatile matchup. These are the 2 biggest damage classes. So yeah, it's like Storm just mercilessly destroys Fire, and I think it's a Storm plus 60 matchup. It is probably going to be the safest that is in the safe category. And I just realized I skipped over a matchup, so we're going to go back for a second after this. But Storm versus Fire, definitely safe for the Storm, winning 60 more games out of 100. It is pretty bad. This is like, yeah, it's like 80 to 20 for the Storm here, and it's like the Fire just dies too easily. And it's like if Fire is trying to go for shields, maybe a Glacial Golem here and there, then the Storm will just strike and catch an L under an aura or bubble or both and just win. And yeah, kind of not much to say on that. It's I did put this in the safe category before. I think I may have given this to Storm by 30 points, but yeah, it is expanded quite a bit. It is doubled in its margin, and it's just very safe for the Storm. It's like if you're a Storm, you probably don't lose this. So it's like you can't play lobotomize because a Fire can catch up to you and kill you, but it's just countering everything a Fire does. It's like Storm counters Reg Fire, which is already like bottom of the barrel, and Storm is able to counter Berry Rain of Fire with Triton, and that alone is going to really put a dent in fire. So Storm, definitely up there. The second safest matchup that I think I'm going to put on here is Death versus Storm. So there is one matchup that is not favorable for the Storm. Or that's not in the swing category at least. So Death versus Storm, it's kind of like, it's like the reason why the fire matchup is like it moves down is because a fire can, it's like if a fire gets an Ifrit off or a tree off or something like that, then it's pretty disastrous. But a death is always going to just keep a storm weakened, and it's like death can use its shields better against the storm, and that's another big part of this. So death versus storm, I'm gonna go in the safe category. There's been a little reversion. I think I might give this to death by 55 points. I think I was giving it to death by 60 before, but there's been a little bit of a reduction in the margin. So yeah, death still easily wins this. It's just don't let the storm get a big hit off. And with 2 forms of damage mitigation at their fingertips, death is very, very good at doing that. So yeah, it's like death is in a very good position against storm, and that is the main school keeping storm in check at the moment. So that's what's up. Next matchup that we're going to be looking at is ice versus death, and at long last, I think I gave this to the ice by maybe 15 of the last one, but at long last, we see an ice. We see a matchup involving ice that goes into the safe category, and I'm gonna give this to the ice by 40 because it's like death. Like death kind of does have to go for the chip strategy now, and ice is just so good at countering everything that death does. It's like before, drains may have kept it down closer to the lean category, but in the time since the drain nerf, I definitely think that this matchup has expanded quite a bit for the ice, and since August we have definitely seen big shifts favoring the ice. So I'm going to say this is ice plus 40, just because ice with spells like Evil Snowman, it just massacres death, and that's just how it is. It's like death is a school that you can actually use your shields against. So yeah, ice versus death at long last. This is the first time in probably 18 or so months where we have seen ice with a safe matchup. So yeah, I mean, it's a shame that neither of these two schools really queue, but you get the point. Next up, fire versus ice, and at the last one I gave this a rating of fire plus 30. I was coming off of my 50 ice games video where that would happen a lot, but I think I don't think it's gotten any safer for the fire, but I think with things like Berry Rain existing in the game, I'm gonna put this in the safe category again. I don't think this has expanded or shrunk. I think it is still a matchup that favors the fire by 30%, or 30 points, 30 games out of 100, that type of deal. But yeah, fire is definitely still favored by quite a margin. So yeah, I mean, ice is just not in a great spot. And this is fire's best matchup by far. So there's that. Life versus ice. You'll notice that I don't even have emojis for these two matchups that involve the ice on top, because I think I hit the limit when I was creating the template. I can submit more now, but I just don't need to, because these two matchups, especially not for the ice, for ice versus life, because this matchup is the worst matchup in the game. This is a life plus 90 matchup, and ice will not win this. And I do have this like half-baked strat that I concocted where it's like I just use every single tri-shield in my side deck and then Shrike and then send 2 Lords of Winter into a Kelvin. And I've never successfully executed that because pulling everything takes a while. And yeah, it's like if you don't kill, the life is just going to heal all the way back up to full health, and then you're dead. So that is why this matchup, you're not winning if you're in ice. This is 95 games out of 100 to the life. The only times I could ever see an ice winning is if the life deck fails a bunch. And yeah, you get the gist. It's like ice has to really bank on that Shrike Lord tree under an aura, and maybe a few blades, but you know, people carrying people, so hard to keep those. So yeah, one-sided, not really hard to tell why. Myth versus Ice is next up on the list, and this is safer than the death matchup, I want to say. Not by much. I think this is like plus 50. This might be plus 51 in favor of the Myth, but yeah, Myth definitely beats Ice pretty much every time. It's like just everything Myth does. It's like Ice is all about damage mitigation. Ice is all about shields and weaknesses, and Myth just goes straight through both of those. It's like if you shield, you get drop aired. You can't set up shield gambits because drop air clears 4. You can't try and go for weaknesses because Stone Colossus, and it's just misery for the Ice to play here. It's like the most that an Ice can do is sit under brace for as long as they can and take open hits when an Ice can. But Myth is very good at shielding against an Ice. So it's like recently, you know, we've seen Ices pivot to using Fire Elf and Elephant, and those are really good cards in this matchup. But Myth is just better than Ice at shielding in this matchup, and yeah, that's sort of what creates this big of a difference. It's like Myth beats Ice at its own game when these two schools square up. So Myth definitely beats Ice. I'm going to give this Myth plus 51, just to barely set it above this. Next up is Ice versus Storm. And this matchup, I don't really know how to feel about this matchup, because I think the last one I said this is maybe Ice plus 20. And now I feel like just with Storm's prevalence and just how good it is, and how a Storm can use Berry Surprise 6 times, it's like, I think this is gone. I think the margin here has halved, and I think that the Ice is only going to win by 10 now, as opposed to the 20 that it was winning by back in August. So yeah, I think, yeah, it's like Ice should still beat Storm, but Storm can outlast Ice. As crazy as that sounds, with things like Berry Surprise, and with all the damage that a Storm can do, it's just very, it's like they're competitive in this matchup, and this matchup where Ice should by all means ruin a Storm, it's still a swing matchup, because Storm is just like think about Catch of the Day, think about, it's like Storm's just using stuff like Fire Elf to clear off Ice's shields. It's like, it's a matchup that's favorable to the Ice, and it's going to be the furthest one to the right in this category, in the swing matchups. But yeah, I mean, Storm is like, Ice should win, but it's harder fought than it was, and that's just how things are. That's how I see things. So next up is going to be Life versus Death. And at the last one, I think I said this was Death plus 29. So anyway, this might be the most intense flip just of the video. You'll notice that I actually don't think we've seen any flips. We've seen some reductions in margin, but this is going to be our first flip. And I think that Life now beats Death by maybe 12 to 15 games out of 100, or 12 to 15 more games out of 100. So the reason for this is Death can't really do damage too well. It's like Grim Reader is really good for that, but it's like if they try and ghoul with an aura into a poison, the life can just can't bandit that back on over, and like it's a shift, you know? So life will counter that, and then it's like death can put up their infections, which will reduce a life's healing, but ultimately life is just still... Like, life can still just spam Luminous Weaver, they can use a bunch of Goat Monks, and ultimately the death is still more than likely going to have to do upwards of like 17,000, 18,000 damage. And that's just a little easier said than done, I feel like, because it's like a life can do 12,000 before a death can do 18,000. So that's kind of what it comes down to. Both schools use Brace pretty well. Death does have an aura counter, and a pretty punishing one at that, but ultimately I do think that this has flipped pretty dramatically in favor of the life, and this is the second, technically, counter matchup, with Myth versus Fire being the first, where it's like the wrong school is on top, so as fun as that is. So yeah, it's gotten into the likely category, not by much, but it is there, and it's a pretty dramatic flip, because this went from like death plus 29 to life plus 12, so that's a pretty intense flip. So yeah, life definitely has gained the upper hand in this matchup, just on the basis of being able to outlast death. So that's what I've seen, that's what's going to happen. Next up is Life versus Myth, and before I would put this as a lean Life, and as y'all saw in technically today's video, but it'll be yesterday for y'all now, I was a Life and I was against a Myth, and I won, but it really came down to the wire. And when I was talking about how Myth can beat Fire with just spamming buffs incessantly and going for like a base gen, against a Life, a Myth can set up an actual gen and threaten a hell of a lot more. So it's like I did a good job of countering the guy's shields with a Elephant that I packed and pulled at a good moment, but this, it's like I might have won that match, but I do think that this has flipped back in favor of the Myth. And I think I'm gonna call this maybe Myth plus like 7. So it'll be it's still a swing matchup, but Myth is favored by just a little more than Life was before. So this is another flip. It's not as dramatic, but Myth, I think, is favored against Life just on the basis of how much damage it can do and just how little mitigation matters. It's like a Life can try to heal, but if the Myth is, you know, packing the counters, then of course that's going to lopside the matchup more in Myth's favor. So yeah, Myth versus Life, lean Myth, and that is the second flip of the video. And that is the third counter matchup where the wrong school is on top. So how about that? It's like Myth is on top in both of its counter matchups, so that's pretty cool. Good job designing the game. Ratbeard already can. Good job, guys. Next up is Storm versus Life, and at the last one I did put this in the safe category, maybe by about 30, and I think I'm going to stick by that and say that Storm is going to beat Life by quite a margin, and it's going to be it's going to be the best answer to Life, because Storm can really do a lot of damage real quick, and that, alongside its heal counters, is just going to really help them. And yeah, it's like Storm is still a fragile school, so if a Life, you know, spams enough hits, then a Life can win. But ultimately, Storm has to spam fewer hits, and they will win. So this is going to be safe Storm at about the same margin that I put it at before, probably about 30 to 35 points. So yep, Storm should win that. Next up, and this is the final matchup on the list, is Storm versus Myth, and this is our next flip. I have seen crazy things happen in this matchup. It's like Storm versus Myth has become much harder for the Myth. It was, before I would put this I think back in June I might have put this maybe closer to here in the safe category, and then in August I put this as a lean myth matchup. But now this has flipped pretty dramatically, and I think that I can reasonably put this into the likely category, favoring the Storm. And I think this is going to favor the Storm maybe 20 more games out of 100. So yeah, it's like, sure, a myth can set up a Djinn, but if a Storm just stacks enough buffs and, you know, they eventually get the myth in checkmate or they go into Shrike, then the Storm has a very easy time winning. It's like, myth might be a resist school, but Storm is that guy. And yeah, it ain't hard to tell. Storm is just very, very strong in its current state. And I mean, what more could you ask for? It's like Storm is definitely on top of myth now. Definitely think that Storm wins that matchup by quite the margin. So this is going to finish up our tier list in terms of how the matchups fall. And now it's time to actually rank the schools. Number 1, without a doubt, is going to be Balance. It's got 2 matchups in the safe category, 1 in the one-sided category. We have seen some reversion in the Storm matchup, but a Balance should still win that. So that is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 winning matchups for the Balance, with the last one being a swing matchup. So yeah, Balance certainly on top. That could change though. It's like I mentioned, the impending ban on Mana Burn and Supernova, and that is really going to shake up this tier list a lot, and I'm really excited to see it because I'm ready to reorder these in such a way where Balance is not winning 5 and only barely losing a 6th. So yeah, Balance's reign will soon come to an end. I'm happy about that. I think they're still going to have maybe a couple favorable matchups, but not as many as they used to. So Balance easily on top. And then for the next one up, I would say Storm's got 1, 2, 3 favorable matchups with 2 swing matchups. And then 1 unfavorable matchup with Death. But Death's don't queue. So, you know, I think... I do think that Storm is still our second best. I'm seeing a lot of matchups where the Myth is favored. I'm seeing Myth favored in 5, but Storm's favorable matchups, yeah, I think Storm's favorable matchups are just going to put them barely above. It's like the 2 that Storm loses, they're both swing matchups, same as Balance, but it's like Storm is definitely in a position. It's like it's too volatile of a school to where anybody can really take them lightly. So yeah, I think I'm gonna put Storm at second, and I would say Myth ties that up. I would say Myth, if I had to choose one, I would say Storm second, Myth at a very, very, very close third. Just because Myth is just insane at ignoring damage mitigation, but 3 of Myth's favorable matchups are in the swing category, so it's like a Myth, as brainless as that school might be, it's like they still do have to play like not lobotomized. So it's like a Myth has to think a little, but they can, it's like they're still in a pretty good position. But this is where we see a significant drop off, and I think for 4th place, I'm going to put Life, just because it's like Life wins 3 against Death, Fire, and Ice, and then loses 3 against Myth, Balance, and Storm. Now, yeah, I think that does mean Life. I'm going to put Life at number 4. Yeah, Life at number 4 sounds about right. So Life, yeah, that's a good place for Life to be. It's in the middle of the pack, and it can still beat Myth, but it's just got some very unfavorable matchups, especially into Balance and Storm. But it is definitely a good school, and no one should really underestimate a life. But it's this 5th, 6th, and 7th that really makes me think, and I kind of just don't know how to order it. I think in 5th place, I think I'm going to put Death. I think like Death has the best stats in the game still. And it's got 2 matchups where it wins in the safe category, but it's also got 3 matchups where it loses in that same category. So it's very matchup based, but I do think Death is going to come in 5th. And then I think we're at a point where I can finally say Ice is not the worst school anymore. I think I'm going to put Ice in 6th, just because it's still a very tanky school. It's very hard to defeat. It's just like at the end of the match, usually the other school is going to be on top. But yeah, I think Ice is going to be 6th, and that leaves Fire at 7th. But Fire is absolutely still competitive, and I'm glad we're in a spot where every school is at least competitive. So if you are a Fire main watching this, yes, your school is 7th out of 7. Like, I'm sorry to say it. But it is not completely hopeless. You can still definitely compete. You have a good matchup into one of the most huge schools. Vaguely, you know, it's like if you're a good player at Fire, you can win this with the right strat. And yeah, that I think is going to wrap up the tier list. So the final ranking: 1st place Balance, 2nd place Storm, very narrowly 3rd place is Myth, 4th after a giant gap is Life, 5th after a giant gap is Death, and then Ice, and then Fire. So that is our list. Thank y'all for watching. I've been Ice Gold. Be sure to like, subscribe, and leave like 50 comments for the algorithm, and I will see y'all later.